So there's a lot of things to explore when it comes to editing colors, and we're going to go one by one. Um, and we're going to try to transform this photo as much as we can without it being something that becomes overly edited or weird. We're just going to try to give this image a lot more feeling, a lot more, I guess, make it have a ton more of impact. And we're definitely going to increase some of the colors that you can see, especially here in the area of the flowers. We won't touch for now any of the masking in develop mode. And we're going to start off, and this is a cool workflow. Anytime you're editing a photo, go from up to bottom. I find that it's the best way to work in ACDSee in general. I prefer to use develop mode always because, yeah, it just flows so much better. So why don't we start by just reducing the exposure just a touch, maybe the highlights a little bit, and maybe increase some contrast. And of course, by affecting the exposure, the highlights, and the contrast, those things will inevitably affect the colors in our image, not only the light, but the colors. Obviously, if I increase the saturation, this would be the most straightforward and basic way to increase the colors in my image. But, and it can definitely be helpful if you want to quickly add color to your photo. Remember to never add too much because you don't want it to look sort of overly saturated, right? And so I find that always just adding a little bit can have a pretty good effect. And just by affecting the exposure, reducing the highlights, adding a bit more contrast and saturation, we already have a more fun, more dynamic photo. I'm going to reduce the saturation slightly and the vibrance. Again, kind of the same principle as saturation. Just a little bit is enough. So pretending that, well, why don't we just also maybe reduce our shadows a little bit? This is another way to create contrast. So if I reduce the shadows and maybe increase the midtones a little bit, but definitely increase the highlights, then I'm creating more contrast. And once you start doing this, you might realize that some of the stuff you were doing before, you want to change again. So for example, as I reduce my shadows, I find that maybe I need to dial it a bit back on the saturation I had before. So Tom asks the difference between saturation and vibrance. Why don't we look for a textbook definition? So saturation affects color intensity and enhances every color in an image, but vibrance is more specific. It saturates the parts of a photo that are not colorful. This allows every color to stand out without making the composition look too busy. So that's a pretty cool explanation. If I increase the saturation, everything will be enhanced. But if I increase the vibrance, then probably we're going to have these mountains here turn more blue than the greens turning more green. And that's exactly what happens. So we've done a very general treatment of our image. Clarity. Yeah, so clarity, what clarity does, it sort of adds texture and detail to your image. If I reduce clarity, you will notice that everything seems a little bit more washed out. There's less details. It's almost like I'm unsharpening the image, which is a cool effect if you're trying to go for that, which is something that we can look into later when we do masking. Like you can decrease the clarity of the background, but increase the clarity of, for example, your subject, and that will create it will give your image more depth, right? So if I increase clarity, you will notice that all of a sudden the mountains seem sharper, the grass seems a little bit more detailed again. So let's move fast from left to right, right to left. You can see how details disappear and then appear once I add clarity. Clarity is a cool, it's a cool tool. Never use it too much because it definitely takes out sort of the organic feeling of an image, and it can quickly start looking very edited. And the dehaze, since we're here, restores contrast and detail and some of the color to your images. So if you have like I don't know, sometimes you take a photo and your lens is a little bit dirty, your phone lens specifically. So the dehaze will help you restore those details in your photos. But let's keep going with color. So yeah, dehaze is very aggressive. You can like, it's just way too much, right? We don't want it to be that way. So I'm going to reduce the highlights a little bit more now that we've gone forward with our edit. And now we have color EQ. And in color EQ, what you'll see once you open it is you'll see two different modes. The standard mode, which is the original color EQ, and then you will see the high quality mode. And the high quality mode uses newer, more modern color models. So it's easier to edit color that way. It's more perceptive and it's a higher quality adjustment. Any recent color EQ before light EQ? Well, I guess it's a good rule of thumb maybe to fix the lighting aspect of your photo before you go into color. But again, like as soon as you start making changes in color, you might want to go back to light EQ and change the shadows again. It's done from top to bottom in develop mode for a reason too. So it's better to go to your general settings, adjust exposure, highlights, maybe fill light to bring back some of the, like it's very similar to racing shadows, the fill light. White balance, of course, if you have an image that you're struggling a little bit with the temperature, you're not, let's say you open an image and the image looks like this, right? You're like, oh, that's strange. This image looks so green. It definitely doesn't look natural. It definitely doesn't look good. And what you would want to do if, let's say, you open the image and it looks this way, is you just open white balance and automatically you will see this eyedropper tool that you are going to want to select on an area that you consider. And sometimes it's a t-shirt, for example, or the wall of a building, for example. And all you have to do is click on the area you want it to be closer to white. And then that should fix that weirdness that we had, that like green tint that our photo had. Same if it was like this, like super pink and orange. You open the photo, it looks like this. You're like, this looks terrible. This should be white. You just open the white balance tool, click, and it restores to that balance. So that's super helpful. So I'm just going to move forward and then maybe we'll do more questions a little bit in the end because I want to be able to go through all the tools. So in Color EQ, one of the awesome things And one of the most straightforward ways to edit colors is as soon as you open the color EQ, you will see this sort of double arrow that appears in your image. And I could, for example, reduce the saturation, because remember, in my color EQ, I have selected high quality mode and I'm in the saturation tab. So if I click this and bring it down, you'll see that my blues have become desaturated, but nothing else has become desaturated. So what ACDSee is doing is selecting the pixels where this little tool appears and either increasing or decreasing the saturation of those pixels. And you can see that change on the color EQ red to magenta sliders. If I bring this down, the blue slider went all the way down, also affecting the cyan colors a little bit. So let's say you wanted to leave only the flowers color, then you could just simply select everything that is far away from the pink tones and bring it down to 0. And then all of a sudden, just leaving the red, the purple, and the magenta, we've left the color of our flowers, but desaturated everything else. Now, remember, you can always go back and reset all of the edits you've done by clicking this little icon right here. So that's a pretty cool way to just start editing colors. Let's try reducing these greens a little. Let's bring them down, because let's try to make the pink pop as much as we can. And now you'll see that we've definitely increased the saturation of our pink and even decreased the greens that we see here. We could maybe bring more orange into the photo by selecting this orange grass right here, right? And then the other thing you can do is to move on to the brightness tab. And this will add, again, more brightness to the specific range of color that you're selecting. So if I wanted this pink to be brighter, I'll just select roughly one of those and bring it up. And all of a sudden, now that those flowers look pretty much radioactive, sort of like alien flowers. But that's just to show you how cool it is to edit color that way. And if you prefer, you can always just do it by selecting the sliders. So I could increase the brightness here. I could reduce the greens, make it a little bit more moody, more contrasty, bring the blues down. Definitely, I think I went a bit too intense with the saturation here on the flowers, so I can bring that down again. So that's a pretty specific way you can go altering the colors in your image. That's a good question, Peter. It is, to my understanding, it's not possible to change the size of the cursor, but definitely something we could consider for future versions. So let's just bring this back to where we had it. And then you might be wondering, you could be like, I really don't like that pink. I want those pink flowers to be yellow. So of course, there's a way to do that in Color EQ. And what you need to do is go to Hue. And what Hue does, so saturation, as we saw, increases the strength of your colors. Brightness increases or decreases the amount of light in that color. And hue changes the color itself. So if I really don't like this pink, I could be like, I'm just going to move my pinks and I can make them red by increasing the hue of purple and magenta. Or I could make them blue by decreasing the purple and magenta. Okay, so as we saw, we can change the color itself of our images. And for example, if I bring up the purple and magenta up to make them more red and change that pink to red, and then I bring the reds to the yellow, I still cannot make the flowers yellow, right? And you can start like moving things around and I'm like, but I want those to be yellow. So if that's what you're trying to do, then color wheel becomes a better option to change colors, because the color EQ will certainly change the specific range of colors in your image, but the color wheel allows you to add, allows you to make a more precise selection of the color you want to affect, and then affect the color itself with these sliders we see here: smoothness, saturation, hue, brightness. So when you open the color wheel, if I pick the pinks, if I click on them, the color wheel will start selecting a sort of a wide area where those colors are. So if I choose my mountains, it'll go towards the blues. If I go to the greens, it'll go to the green and yellow. And if I choose the pink, it'll go to the pink. So now that I have the pink selected in my color wheel, same principle. I can reduce the saturation of those pinks, increase the saturation of those pinks, increase the brightness of those pinks, make it look really weird. I'll just bring those back to 0. Smoothness in color, you can't really see affecting here in the image, because what smoothness does is sort of, it's a very, very faint, like if my levels were super intense, like back to that intensity of saturation and brightness, then the smoothness will act as a sort of feathering, and it will start affecting a little bit more the areas outside those colors. If you can look at the color wheel, when I reduce the smoothness, you'll see that the edges of my selection are pretty sharp. And if I increase the smoothness, then it adds a little bit of feathering there to the outside. So we're trying to make these flowers look green, look yellow. And so now that I've selected that range, what if I change the hue? Let's see what happens. I have a lot more room to move my colors, so compared to color EQ. So right there, they're already started turning orange. And if I increase the brightness, then the yellow starts to appear. Right? And then I can decrease the saturation so it doesn't look so strange. Maybe there's is good actually. And if we zoom in, we'll see that we still have some green areas in our yellow flowers. So all we have to do to change that is to add another color wheel. So now we have 2 color wheels in the tool, and I'm going to select the area that looks a little bit green. Notice how the color wheel is still seeing the real color behind my edit. It's still matching the pink tones, but it doesn't matter. I'm just selecting right there. And again, I'm moving the hue to my right. Oh, sorry, to my left. Right, because it's opposite. So if we move on to the tone wheels, this is an area where you can change the tones of your highlights. You can make your clouds purple if you wanted, or make them more blue. You can make your midtones more orange or more blue. And you can make your shadows yellow, red, blue, green. Let's reset this group. So that's another awesome way to change the tone of your highlights and your shadows. I have a question for you guys. What is the difference between a filter or a photo effect? Like, let's say this instant filter right here. What is the difference between a photo effect and a color LUT? Does anyone have an idea of what the difference could be? Okay. Cool. Okay, yeah. Well, Chris, you might be onto something there. I'm not quite sure about that, but the way that I've sort of understand it is that the photo effect is more of an overlay, and the color LUT is goes into into each pixel, sort of really transforms the color of your image, right? So think about the photo effect as this overlay of color, of tone that you put over your photo. And think of the color LUT as something that is truly affecting the inside of your image. And so it's better to use a color LUT if you're trying to um, edit your photo in a way that's like a deeper sort of uh, color editing in your photo. And so now I've applied, and we can see the difference. For example, this is the color LUT, the film color LUT, and this is a photo effect, the instant photo effect. So I think you can definitely see it. Like it's like the instant, what it's doing is sort of putting this tone, um, this overlay of color into your image in general, but the color LUT is actually changing your image, and you can achieve better results, definitely. And so I would totally go for color LUTs, and the film color LUT and the elegance color LUT are kind of my favorites. They add this really cool blue orangey tone that is very classic of films. And you can, if you think that this is too much, you can of course reduce the opacity of your color LUT. So if I bring it down to 0, is how I had my image before, and if I bring it to the right, I'll start to see it come to life again. Yeah, photo effect is like if when you use a filter, for example, on Instagram or social media. but the color LUT is actually changing the color of your photo. It's not an overlay. So we've transformed our image fully. We even changed the color of our flowers. And we made a photo that looked like this. So it's a pretty big edit. It's a pretty big color editing, right? And the cool thing is that you have all of your edits right here to the left in develop mode. And you can, if you find that some things are not working too well for you, all you have to do is just go back to them. Okay, so that's how we edited the general aspects of our photo with some color changing inside the image. Let's try other examples. And again, oh, I know why it wasn't working so well. I was editing the JPEG. I wasn't editing my raw image. Well, yep. Okay. Well, let's take a look at everything. So I'm just going to recreate my edit now that I open it again as a raw file. And I'm just going to try to do this quickly. This is going to be a speed edit. A little bit of contrast. Yeah, Chris said it right. That's exactly what it is. A LUT is a LUT. LUT is a lookup table, and it actually changes the colors. The filter does not change the color. It's an overlay that you're adding on top of your image. So I'm just going to make this a bit more moody right here. And again, I'm going to, with my color wheel, select my pink colors and change the hue to yellow. I guess it's easier if I first change them to red. Add another color wheel. And make the flowers yellow like that. Bring a little bit more saturation, bring a little bit more brightness. And I will apply my color LUT. This is a good overview of what we just did. I'll apply film and reduce it so that it's not so striking, but more subtle. There we have it. Let's see. Now that we're in develop mode, let's just go through all of our settings. And we did do light EQ, Peter. We're just doing it on basic. I'm just editing shadows, midtones, and highlights. I'm not going to go into the more advanced settings, but we can definitely have a future workshop where we do go into light EQ more deeply. Let's see what So Focus does. Pretty similar to what happens when we reduce the clarity of our image. The soft focus tool adds a dreamy quality to your images. This is the description from the ACDSee website. The softening can be applied across the entire tonal range or limited to the image midtones. So you can do that by adjusting the tonal width right here. You can use the entire tonal range or start reducing it. But anyways, the soft filter adds this dreamy look to your image, reduces a bit the details, and definitely can have used well. Because if we take it out, we can see the images, you know, the details are very strong, they're very contrasty. And if we add the So Focus, it sort of washes it out a little bit. And it's definitely useful. There we go. I guess another thing that definitely affects color that we didn't look at is the split tone. And the split tone is, I think it comes from filmmaking, which is basically injecting color to your highlights and injecting color to your shadows. And this is how much of the film look that you see in older movies was done. So if I increase my highlight saturation, just like this, I'm injecting a bunch of color, right? And all of a sudden, we have an apocalyptic sky. But I'm going to bring it down a little bit, and I'm going to make it blue, bluish. So that's before and after. And my shadows. And as you can see, it's grabbing basically the entire image. I'll make it a bit more orange. And that's how it was before and after. Definitely a more exaggerated film look. But we'll just revert to changes. And remember, another reason that why using develop mode is so good is because everything you did, you can save this photo, right? You can save it as a new file or whatever, but you can just go back to manage mode and you'll see that your photo was edited. You can see this little icon here that tells you it's been edited. And you can move on, and those changes are saved, but they're not destructive. You can always go back to develop mode and unchange everything. Go back, re-edit, or reset by clicking this icon. Boom, and it's back to normal. And you don't have to be saving as, creating new files. You don't have to do that. So at the end of the day, it's a pretty good workflow. So if you go to the panes on the top menu, you will see history and everything I do. So I'm increasing contrast, reducing saturation, vibrancy. Then you can see all of the history right there of what you've done. If you want, you can dock this right here on the bottom right. Right? And then you can undo certain things. So I'll just undo all because we're going to try to change some colors here specifically. So we'll edit this photo, and then if we have time, we'll get into more of the blend modes for effects and LUTs. But that's a good question, Peter. If I treated this photo the way I did my last photo, and I wanted to, let's say, change the red tones here, if I went to, for example, my color EQ, and I changed the hue of my reds, like that, you will see that, of course, the pink flowers in the background or the red flowers in the background are also being affected by the change in hue in the red tones. But I only want to change the color of my subject. This is where everyone that has 2024 basically have a little bit of an advantage, because you can select your subject. And as you can see, it's selected just our subject. It's missing some areas down here, but we can easily fix that just by brushing over them, making sure we're selecting the entirety of our subject. Like that. So now, if I go to the, after selecting my subject, you will see this pane appear. And in my pane, now I have my subject as a mask, and I can decrease the exposure, increase the exposure. These are things that you probably know of only my subject. And if I wanted to change the red colors, all I have to do is go to the Color EQ tab right here. And just as Color EQ on the bottom, you will have ways of editing the saturation in your colors, the brightness of your colors, the hue of your colors, and the contrast of your colors. You also have this double arrow right here that you can use exactly the same way as we saw in Color EQ, on the Color EQ tab. So if I go back to the hue and I move my red tones to the right, they'll become orange. And they won't affect anything in the background. But what if you want to be even more specific? You're like, I really like the red dress, but I don't like the roses to be red. I want them to be pink, for example. Then you have two choices. We'll just start over. You can select your subject like we did before. And with the right click of your mouse, deselect everything that you don't want to affect in your image. Because what happens is that whenever you do a selection, then you can either take away from that selection or add to that selection with the brush tool that appears immediately after you create a selection. So if I want to be really precise, I'm going to increase my pressure to 100, meaning, and my feathering, I'll reduce my feathering so that I can be more precise of where I'm editing, where I am deselecting. And because we're going to target the red colors, I don't have to worry too much about my selection being super precise. Because those red colors there, everything that's surrounding it is in red, right? Okay, so now that I have my roses selected, I'll hide my mask. I'll go to the Color EQ. I'll go to the Hue button or icon. Maybe I'll bring this out a little bit so that we can see better. And I will start changing my reds. And all of a sudden, I have purpley pink flowers. I could increase the brightness of my flowers by increasing the reds, because remember, the original colors in the background are red. And then we only change the color of those roses. That's a good question, Peter. I don't know. Let's try. I have my doubts. I don't think it'll be possible. If anyone has a good idea of how to do that, that'd be great. But we can try. So let's say okay, let's reset everything to how we had it. Well, I could desaturate, but desaturating it will just make it gray. Let's see. Okay. So if I desaturate the reds and the pinks and everything that is kind of like close to the roses, you see it's all gray. And as Antoine is saying, I can definitely increase the brightness of them. And I can start getting close to white, but I don't think it'll be able to reach there, because if it did, then we would have sort of like blown out, like overexposed flowers, right? So we can get close to white, I guess. The other color challenge, change to black or white. Yeah. So, well, if you just reduce the saturation of your image in general by opening the General tab, you will make your photo black and white. And you can play around with the contrast and the exposure to make it have a more interesting look. So one of the things that you can do in edit mode, sort of automatically, is to make your background black and white by just using one click. And it works so good. But you can also do that in develop mode by going to masking, select AI background, and decrease the saturation. And the selection here, you can see that it's desaturating our subject a little bit, but we can change that by deselecting with our right click where our subject is. We hide our mask, and now we have our subject in color and our background in black and white. Spyros, there is AI in 2023. You will see them in edit mode. So in edit mode, you will have the opportunity to select your subject, select your background, black and white your background. These selections are the same in 2023. They are better in 2024. Definitely the selections have been refined compared to the previous version. And what is the difference between the color and black and white buttons in general? Let's see. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so that's an even more straightforward way. Thank you, Peter, for pointing that out. If you choose black and white, the general treatment of your image it'll sort of automatically, you'll see that the saturation and the vibrance sliders are gone because it will automatically desaturate your image fully, but you can still work with contrast and exposure. Let's open advanced black and white. So this is pretty cool because for example, the original reds in my image, I can change them by moving the sliders left or right. So remember the reds that we had in the dress and in the flowers back there? I can reduce their brightness. And so this is a pretty awesome way to affect the brightness of specific colors in your black and white image. And then if you wanted to give it some sort of color, you have the possibility to add coloration to your black and white image by increasing the amount and, of course, changing the hue of your image. So that looks really cool, really sort of elegant, interesting black and white approach to this image. I'm gonna maybe change, yeah, the greens, make it a little bit less bright. And so we have a very powerful, colorful photo turned into this noir sort of moody image by using the black and white treatment combined with the advanced black and white. So again, if I want to reset to defaults, all I had to do was just click above here and my image is restored to where I had it. That's I haven't been around long enough to use black and white film. So someone else would have to answer the question, but that would be awesome to know. Okay, well, I think we just ran out of time. Thank you for joining. I hope that this session was a little bit a good introduction to color. Of course, there's a lot more advanced things to do, more details to be done, but this is definitely a good basic explanation of how to change color in your photos.